In 2007, Nokia was not just a phone company. It was the absolute master of mobile. The company held nearly 50% of the global smartphone market, completely crushing every competitor in sight. Its contribution to Finland's GDP was massive, effectively powering the entire nation's economy for over a decade. Executives walked the hallways of Espoo with the confidence of emperors who believed they could not fail. Yet, within just 6 years, the company's mobile division was sold for parts to Microsoft. The market value plummeted by over 90%, wiping out billions of dollars in shareholder wealth overnight. How does a company with half the world's market share simply evaporate in such record time? Most people blame the iPhone, but the real rot started long before Steve Jobs walked on stage. This is the story of how arrogance, internal politics, and fear destroyed a national identity. Welcome to the definitive autopsy of Nokia, a lesson in why being the biggest often means nothing. To understand the fall, we must first appreciate the staggering scale of Nokia's dominance in the 2000s. Nokia was selling hundreds of millions of devices, with a supply chain that was a logistical miracle. They could churn out a new phone model in weeks while competitors took months to respond. The brand was so strong that in many developing nations, the word for phone was simply Nokia. But this operational perfection created a dangerous blind spot that would eventually kill the entire company. Nokia became obsessed with hardware efficiency, believing that physical devices were the only thing that mattered. They treated software as a secondary feature, something you just slapped onto the hardware to make it work. This hardware-first culture meant that software engineers were treated like second-class citizens within the corporate hierarchy. While Silicon Valley was realizing that software was eating the world, Nokia was still counting plastic buttons. Then came 2007, the year everything changed, but not in the way Nokia executives expected. When Apple launched the iPhone, Nokia executives dismissed it as a niche toy for rich people. They mocked its poor battery life and its inability to survive a drop test on concrete. They laughed at the idea of a virtual keyboard, convinced that users would always demand physical keys. One famous internal report stated that the iPhone would never capture meaningful market share due to price. This was not just a bad prediction. It was a fundamental failure to understand human desire. Nokia was selling communication tools, but Apple was selling a pocket computer that happened to make calls. Nokia's operating system, Symbian, was a tangled mess of old code that was impossible to modernize. Developing an app for Symbian took weeks, whereas developing for iOS took days, frustrating developers everywhere. Nokia knew Symbian was dying, so they started developing a replacement called Memo, later merging into Migo. But internal politics turned the development of this new operating system into a bureaucratic nightmare. Different teams fought for resources, hiding information from each other instead of collaborating to save the ship. Middle managers were terrified of delivering bad news to the top, so they simply lied about progress. Reports were sanitized to make it look like Nokia was catching up, when in reality, they were drowning. This culture of fear meant that the CEO and board had absolutely no idea how bad things were. While Rome burned, Nokia's middle management was busy fighting turf wars and protecting their annual bonuses. In 2010, Nokia finally realized they were in crisis and hired Stephen Alop from Microsoft as CEO. Alop was the first non-Finn to lead the company, a desperate move to shake up the culture. He famously wrote the burning platform memo, comparing Nokia to a man on a burning oil rig. He said the company had to jump into the freezing ocean to survive, signaling a radical shift. Alop made the controversial decision to kill Symbian and the promising Migo to adopt Windows Phone. This was the moment Nokia truly signed its own death warrant, though few realized it at the time. By announcing Symbian was dead before Windows phones were ready, he effectively destroyed Nokia's current sales. Customers stopped buying Symbian phones immediately, knowing the software had no future support from the company. This is known in business as the Osborne Effect, where you announce a future product and kill current sales. Meanwhile, a quiet revolution was happening at Google that Nokia had arrogantly dismissed years prior. Google had acquired Android, and was offering it to manufacturers essentially for free to capture search traffic. Nokia had the chance to switch to Android, but they refused to become just another hardware manufacturer. They believed their brand was too big to use the same software as Samsung or HTC. This pride cost them everything, as Android quickly became the standard for every non-Apple smartphone. Samsung adopted Android and rocketed past Nokia, stealing the mass market that Nokia once owned. While Nokia struggled to make Windows work, the app ecosystem for Android and iOS exploded exponentially. Developers ignored Windows Phone because it had no users, and users ignored it because it had no apps. It was a vicious cycle that no amount of marketing money or hardware excellence could fix. Let's look at another massive strategic blunder that cost Nokia billions: the acquisition of Navteq. In 2007, Nokia spent over $8 billion to buy Navteq, a leader in digital mapping data. They believed that owning road data would be the moat that protected them from competitors like Google. They wanted to place sensors on roads to monitor traffic, building a massive physical infrastructure network. Meanwhile, Google bought Waze and simply used data from user phones to map traffic for free. Nokia bet on physical assets while Google bet on crowdsourced data, and Google won decisively. The Navteq acquisition became a worthless money pit that drained Nokia's cash reserves when they needed them most. By 2012, Nokia's credit rating had been cut to junk status, a humiliation for Finland's crown jewel. The stock price, which had once traded above $40, was now trading under $3. The board of directors was paralyzed, unable to admit that their Microsoft strategy was a total failure. Finally, in 2013, Microsoft announced it would buy Nokia's mobile device business for just over $7 billion. This was a fraction of what Nokia was worth just a few years prior. It was a tragic end to one of the most innovative hardware companies in history. But the story gets even worse when you look at what happened after the Microsoft acquisition. Microsoft wrote off nearly the entire purchase price a year later, admitting the acquisition was worthless. Thousands of Finnish engineers lost their jobs, devastating the local economy of towns like Salo and Oulu. The Nokia brand, once a symbol of European technological superiority, disappeared from the smartphone market completely. So what is the practical lesson for investors and business leaders watching this tragedy unfold today? The first lesson is that success is a terrible teacher, creating complacency and fear of change. Nokia was so good at making feature phones that they could not imagine a world without them. They optimized their business for the present while the future was being built in Cupertino and Mountain View. The second lesson is that software always wins over hardware in the modern digital economy. You can have the best antenna design in the world, but without apps, your phone is a brick. Nokia engineered beautiful devices, but they failed to build an ecosystem that developers wanted to support. The third lesson is about corporate culture and the danger of silencing dissent from below. If your middle managers are afraid to tell the truth, your CEO is flying the plane blind. Nokia's engineers knew Symbian was broken, but that information never reached the people who could fix it. Honesty is inefficient in the short term, but it is the only thing that saves companies long term. Today, Nokia still exists, but it is a very different company focused on network infrastructure. They build the 5G towers that allow iPhones and Androids to work, retreating to the background. They are profitable again, but the glory days of ruling the consumer world are gone forever. The fall of Nokia is a stark reminder that no company is too big to fail. Arrogance is the most expensive liability on any balance sheet, capable of bankrupting nations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into business history, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We break down the biggest failures and successes in the global economy every single week. Let me know in the comments which corporate collapse you want us to analyze in the next video. Thanks for watching, and remember, in business, only the paranoid survive.